Chapter 3, Voyage Down Coast, wherein the voyager before leaving the rivers discourses on dangers, to which is added some account of mangrove swamps and the creatures that abide therein. I left Calabar in May and joined the Bengula off Lagos Bar. My voyage down coast in her was a very pleasant one, and full of instruction, for Mr. Fothergill, who was her purser, had in former years resided in Congo Francais as a merchant, and to Congo Francais I was bound with an empty hold as regards local knowledge of the district. He was one of that class of men of which you most frequently find representatives among the merchants, who do not possess the power so many men along here do possess, a power that always amazed me, of living for a considerable time in a district without taking any interest in it, keeping their whole attention concentrated on the point of how long it will be before their time comes to get out of it. Mr. Fothergill evidently had much knowledge and experience of the Fernand Vaz district and its natives. He had, I should say, overdone his experience with the natives, as far as personal comfort and pleasure at the time went, having been nearly killed and considerably chivied by them. Now, I do not wish a man, however much I may deplore his total lack of local knowledge, to go so far as this. Mr. Fothergill gave his accounts of these incidents calmly, and in an undecorated way that gave them a power and convincingness verging on being unpleasant, although useful to a person who was going into a district where they had occurred, for one felt there was no mortal reason why one should not personally get involved in similar affairs. And I must here acknowledge the great subsequent service Mr. Fothergill's wonderful, accurate descriptions of the peculiar characteristics of the Ogwe forests were to me when I subsequently came to deal with these forests on my own account, as every district of forest has peculiar characteristics of its own, which you require to know. I should like here to speak of West Coast dangers, because I fear you may think that I am careless of or do not believe in them, neither of which is the case. The more you know of the west coast of Africa, the more you realize its dangers. For example, on your first voyage out, you hardly believe the stories of fever told by the old coasters. That is because you do not then understand the type of man who is telling them, a man who goes to his death with a joke in his teeth. But a short experience of your own, particularly if you happen on a place having one of its periodic epidemics, soon demonstrates that the underlying horror of the thing is there, a rotting corpse which the old coaster has dusted over with jokes to cover it so that it hardly shows at a distance, but which, when you come yourself to live alongside, you soon become cognizant of. Many men, when they have got ashore and settled, realize this and let the horror get a grip on them, a state briefly and locally described as funk, and a state that usually ends fatally, and you can hardly blame them. Why, I know of a case myself. A young man who had never been outside an English country town before in his life, from family reserves, had to take a situation as a bookkeeper down in the Bights. The factory he was going to was an isolated, out-of-the-way place, and not in a settlement, and when the ship called off it, he was put ashore in one of the ship's boats with his belongings and a case or so of goods. There were the only firm's beach boys down at the surf, and as the steamer was in a hurry, the officer from the ship did not go up to the factory with him, but said goodbye and left him alone with a set of naked savages, as he thought, but really of good kindly Karoo boys on the beach. He could not understand what they said, nor they what he said, and so he walked up to the house and on to the veranda and tried to find the agent he had come out to serve under. He looked into the open-ended dining room and shyly round the veranda, and then sat down and waited for someone to turn up. Sundry natives turned up and said a good deal, but no one white or comprehensible, so in desperation he made another and a bolder tour completely round the veranda, and noticed a most peculiar noise in one of the rooms, and an infinity of flies going into the Venetian shuttered windows. Plucking up courage, he went in and found what was left of the white agent, a considerable quantity of rats, and most of the flies in West Africa. He then presumably had fever, and he was taken off a fortnight afterwards by a French boat to whom the natives signalled, and he is not coming down the coast again. Some men would have died right out from a shock like this. But most of the newcomers do not get a shock of this order. They either die themselves or get more gradually accustomed to this sort of thing, when they come to regard death and fever as soldiers who on a battlefield sit down and laugh and talk around a campfire after a hard day's hard battle, in which they have seen their friends and companions falling round them, all the time knowing that tomorrow the battle comes again, and that tomorrow night they themselves may never see.